Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry?
Hello lovelies, today we're taking a look at the true relation of the Great Virginia Disastrum 1633 by Ezra Claverie for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. You may have been noticing a theme recently. It comes as 3 volumes. Very nice volumes they are too. So let's start off with the usual disclosure stuff. I got the book for free in order to review it. I'm friends with Jim Raggi, who runs Lamentations of the Flame Princess. So those things may factor in how I treat the book. And I also don't really like adventures, which may influence things in a more negative fashion. I suppose. Why don't I like adventures? Because they tend to be one and done. They don't, to me, represent good value for money, and just the sheer nature of translating the game experience or expected game experience into a book renders it somewhat linear and railroady, which isn't my preferred style or way of doing things. So keep all that in mind up front. Also, I give scores out of 5 and out of 10, but it's the same score. But I use the full range. So if you're used to computer game reviews, then if an average game when it comes to a computer game is normally rated around 7, and anything under 7 people think is bad. 5 out of 10 from me, or 3 out of 5 is average, but average is perfectly adequate. So anything above that is good, anything below that is bad overall. So I have to kind of calibrate people before I really get into this sort of stuff to help with their expectations, I suppose. Alright, on to the books themselves. Keep in mind, spoilers are pretty inescapable of one degree or another, so if you're expecting to be playing this, look away now. So, a true relation of the Great Virginia Disastrum 1633, which I guess I'll call Disastrum from now on to save my vocal cords. It's a series of 3 books. They all come together, hardback, linen cover with a gilt inlay, lovely, sepia end paper, sepia background to the pages as a whole to a large degree, has a lovely gold ribbon. We like ribbons. Volume 1 is Jamestown and Environs, digest format, 100 pages. Volume 2 is Low New Lands, digest format, about 200 pages. Volume 3 is Prodigies, Monsters, and the Index, which covers all 3 books. That clocks in at about 100 pages or thereabouts, as I recall. Let me just double check, make sure I didn't get that wrong. Yeah, just over 100. Now 100 pages wouldn't normally be this thick, so the paper quality is pretty good. It's pretty heavy stock. So these are good, solid books that are going to last and are going to stand up quite well to handling at the table, apart from maybe the gilt. Whether you'd want to use them for reference at the table, considering they're such lovely objects, I don't know. Anyway, so just starting with Volume 1, even though many of my observations and thoughts from Volume 1 are going to carry across to the other books. The artwork and illustration throughout the books is nice, and it kind of splits the difference between the kind of stuff you would expect at the time, in that being fairly crude woodblock prints at the time. It sort of splits the difference between that and proper illustrations like we would expect in modern RPGs. So there's a touch of the traditional looking woodblock, but it's still recognizable as more modern, more complex, more detailed, more well executed art. Plus you have maps and things which are far more graphical and harken back to the locations book that Lamentations put out, whose name has temporarily evaporated from what I laughingly call a brain, as it is increasingly addled. So this book kind of sets out the context in which the adventures are going to take place, for the most part, which is Jamestown, one of the very early settlements in the New World. Yes, filthy colonialists, blah blah blah, all of that nonsense. And this whole setting, this whole set of adventures, everything in it kind of combines the best and worst aspects of Lamentations for me. The historical grounding in a real place, and using that as a context for more traditionally fantasy adventures. That works for me a lot. The historical grounding is great, and it has quite a lot of that. But then it has what for me is the worst aspect of Lamentations as well, which is the also random weirdness for the sake of weirdness. Not quite as odd for the sake of odd as, say, Vengeance Satanas' work is, but still odd for the sake of odd. So here is a brief summary of the plot. Due to a summon spell gone wrong, which will be familiar to anyone who's ever played Lamentations of Flame Princess, fifth dimensional aliens have crashed their ship. And that crashed ship and its malfunctioning drive is what is causing the oddness in the world, having punched holes in space, time, and reality itself across dimensions. Are your characters, your players, ever going to find that out by adventuring through the book? Probably not. So even as a rationale for all the weirdness and oddness going on, it's a bit of a reach. It's not something that's going to be apparent to most characters, or even comprehensible to most characters going through the adventure. So you almost could have had it without the explanation and just kind of left it at that. So it's a bit like Roadside Picnic dialed up to 11 or even 12, as there are a dozen or so, or at least a dozen or so, other dimensions, spaces and times attached to the area close to Jamestown, where this hole has been punched through reality to a whole bunch of different places as well. And that all adds a lot more weirdness. Weirdly, it kind of reminds me of a book called Mission by Patrick Tilley, where Jesus abruptly turns up in modern New York, I think, and adjusts his message for the people there, and it starts to sound a lot more Scientology, a sort of clash in heaven between two, which is space, between two alien races that are operating on a higher dimension. Yeah, it's weird, but it kind of made me think of that. Now, there is a lot of reusable content here, which is good for me, who otherwise doesn't like adventures. There are plenty of monsters you could reuse, creatures and animals. There's a location called the Blistered Forest. You could even move the whole setting somewhere, anywhere else that you wanted, given the multi-dimensional nature of the thing. So there is a lot more reusability in terms of tables, resources for colonial adventures, that sort of thing, that you may find useful. A lot of the monsters and creatures, such as the ones you can see here, come from either actual native mythology or weird ideas that people from the Age of Exploration had about what tribes and so on lurked out there, furry people with eyes on their chests, things like that. So that's a nice touch as well. Jamestown is a good setting, a limited, isolated community surrounded by terra incognita. and yeah, people had a lot of weird ideas about the New World, coupled with alchemy and philosophy and so on. And all of this is presented in a semi-historical fashion within the context of the beliefs of the time, mostly. And so the setting and the background material certainly feels realistic-ish, and meets one of my key design philosophies in creating games, which is that of plausibility, in that you need to be able to suspend disbelief, and until you get into the super weird elements that don't necessarily get explained particularly well, or will never be explained from the point of view of the characters, it's all well and good. There's a lot of useful tables, names, things you'll find in people's pockets or carried by hunting parties of Native Americans, things like that. So lots of useful tables, a few Zachisms like dropping dice to scatter on a sheet of paper to generate things. And there's a decent primer on the history, the indigenous tribes of the area, and so on. So there's plenty of useful stuff here, which increases the longevity of the whole thing. It's described as a point crawl, which is a little bit different to a hex crawl. In a hex crawl, you just kind of encounter stuff. There needn't necessarily be an overall sort of thing going on, or a dungeon crawl, which is a very enclosed location. As you explore, you will uncover various aspects of the stories and stuff going on, and that's all well and good. So it kind of combines a more linear story with a hex crawl. I guess that's the best way to explain what a point crawl is. So moving on. We have Volume 2. Now, this is primarily the encounters, the previously mentioned points. Some are useful elsewhere. You could lift them and put them into pretty much any other game if you wanted to. As I said, it's a point crawl rather than a hex crawl, so there are encounter events that are important that you need to incorporate at some point, and then there are also set locations with oddities and weirdness going on there as well. You could drop in other things here as well if you wanted to. Some of the weird crushers or don't fuck the priests could easily fit in here. The Blistered Forest has its own whole forest subsystem for exploring there, so that you can generate similar terrain and ideas if you wanted to. This is the meat and potatoes of the adventure, the set location, the points, some more explanation of what's going on, though again, the Games Master is really the only one that's ever likely to understand what's actually going on in any real way, shape or form. It's going to be very difficult for anyone else to do so. So as well as the locations and the kind of scripted events, this book also details each of the neighbouring dimensions that the ship drive has blown holes in and linked together. And each of those neighbouring dimensions could be its own setting or mini setting, or even a campaign of its own, given how weird and interesting many of them are. So you could revisit those for some of your games, or have some of them be revelations or predictions of something peculiar that is going to happen. The Body Snatcher-esque future London, for example, is something that would make a decent mini campaign all of its own. And so the case is for the rest of it. Some of it's too weird, I think, to be particularly useful or usable to transfer characters into from a more historical campaign other than through this. But again, this does extend the usefulness and usability of the book beyond that of the simple adventure. Some cases, particularly with the other dimensions, I felt that we could have done with more detail, and some other things like the more basic isn't quite the word, but the more usual encounters perhaps didn't need to take up quite as much space as they did. So yeah, I was particularly fascinated by the City of the Crawling Blood, and felt a bit shortchanged by it. But that has its whole own whole generation system as well, which might be useful in other urban settings other than a London overrun by bloody body snatchers. But yeah, that's the nature of the second book. It's all of that kind of content, the adventure itself. So volume 1 is the setting, volume 2 is the adventure and locations relating to it, and then volume 3 has all the kind of new normal stuff that you might expect from a supplement. So new spells, new monsters, some of which are reusable, some are not. Some spells, as is the case with a lot of Lamentation stuff, some spells that are only really applicable to the adventures and provide excuses and options for the adventures, but do also provide a form of reward for any magic users that you might have in your party. But yeah, this goes through the native tribes, the weird distorted versions of people that have been churned out by the Disastrum, some other peculiar creatures and devices, or devices which are also creatures, or creatures which are also devices. Yeah, there's a lot of creativity and imagination on show here. The semi-woodcut illustrations seem to particularly suit the weirdness, perhaps because, given the nature of the illustration, it's sometimes somewhat ambiguous. And also, if you've ever read any of the old books and pamphlets of the time, it's certainly very evocative of what you would see there. And there's not a lot for me to say here other than, yeah, it's a lot of weird oddness, unpredictable monsters, which I think is a hallmark of Lamentations. So while that's material that you could use elsewhere, that might kind of defeat the object of it being Lamentations if you have set monsters everywhere, rather than making up your own or using individual monsters for individual encounters. As I said before, a lot of these are taken from real myth or deformed and weird human tribes that people made up or pretended to have encountered back at the time. So taken as a whole, then, what do we make of this? This is like a big tentpole product for Lamentations. For me, however, much as I hate to disappoint Jim, it's not something I would normally buy for myself, given my prejudice against adventures. For me, there is a lot of material that you can transpose and reuse, but a lot of it is so individual to the particular setting that I don't know that it's just, I don't know that it would be that useful for me. Other people's mileage may vary. I would have preferred something more grounded in the reality, with the oddness kind of nibbling at the edges, and adventures and so on based around that, or securing the colony and its surrounds, that sort of thing. I would have liked more of a sort of Bone Tomahawk sort of thing, albeit in an earlier age, and the weirdness for weirdness' sake almost just doesn't appeal to me. But those are my biases. You may not have them. In terms of presentation, I honestly cannot fault these books in any way, shape or form. They're going to look great on the shelf. They're going to look great with you looking through them. They are tough, well made. The artwork is both appropriate and well executed, which is one of my chief complaints about a lot of modern game books. They all have this same sort of non-style style. There's no effort, there's no commitment to the bit. You know, I've got hold of the D&D 2024 Player's Guide, which I'll be going through, and a lot of my discussion and criticism of that goes with art, though I do think it's better than 5th edition. But here, no complaints about presentation. It's all extremely well done. In terms of substance, given the sheer volume of material, I did feel a bit shortchanged, but again, this is my biases speaking. I want stuff that I can rip off, reuse. If I'm buying an adventure at all, it really has to push the boat out in terms of reusability and so on, and for me there wasn't enough here, and the weirdness for weirdness sake also kind of prevents you from taking some material and using it elsewhere, because it's so strongly connected to the rationale or excuses that exist for the oddities. So scores then, I'll give it a style of 5 and a high 5 at that. High 5. In terms of substance, but this is for me, remember my biases, I would give it a middle to high 3. So that's still 8 out of 10 or 4 out of 5. So that's still a pretty good recommendation, but I think you have to really get the true full value of these books out, you have to be someone who can commit to a short to mid-term campaign, doesn't mind the oddness for oddness sake, and gets a lot out of pre-prepared adventures. So there's certainly a lot here for you to get your teeth into, and for your group to get their teeth into. For me, the real value is in Volume 1, Jamestown and Environs, because I have thought about running colonial games in the past. So that for me is where the real value is. A lot will depend on your taste. I have my own peculiar tastes and biases, so take everything I've said with a pinch of salt. These are, however, absolutely certainly thoroughly nice objects that elevate the art form of RPG material in a way that very few games do. Zang.
Pulp Nova is a collection of short stories in the old pulp style but with a modern twist. You should find something here you like, from western to mythos horror to science fiction. You can get Pulp Nova at Drive-Thru Fiction, on Amazon, or in hard copy from lulu.com.
Today, see, I don't like I have, okay, like a lot of you, I hate a lot, you know? But I hate with style and creativity. Yeah!